But it's quite possible that even richer purposes will continue to emerge as they have over the billions of years of life on Earth.
Most of human existence seems to have been characterized by an appetite, I think you call it as an appetite for what is true.
Yes.
And yet at some point we seem to have been able to jump off that and develop an appetite for what is not true. How did that happen?
Well, there are two different kinds of answers here in a way. One's just storytelling by itself, and the other is religion, if you accept that not all religious stories can be true.
Most people accept that.
Yes. The other people's religions aren't true, yes. I think I trace the origins of stories back through the origins of the arts in general, because I think it's very, very probable that storytelling emerged later than the other arts. There are close analogues to music in other species, and in related species like gibbons and other ape. There is a kind of complex duetting between males and females. Mm-hmm. And it seems likely that the visual arts too go back possibly even 1 million years or so. It has been argued that the refinement of hand axes to a degree of symmetry and perfection and clear evidence that these very highly refined hand axes were not actually used for any purpose because there's no scratch marks on them, and other evidence that pushes art back at least 120,000 years ago, and probably more than that, visual art. And
you talk about the significance of ancient cave drawings or paintings, and one asks, I suppose, and these were the first signs of non-essential behaviour. Is that the beginning of storytelling? Because clearly many of those cave drawings, I went to Lascaux once and was amazed by it. They were telling stories.
Well, they could be, or they're very enigmatic. But I mean, I think we just, there's so much we don't know, and like the discoveries at Chauvet Cave suddenly pushed the date of the first known cave painting back twice as far, from 17,000 to 33,000 years ago. But there does seem to be evidence of using ochre for body adornment 120 or perhaps 240,000 years ago. I'm not sure that it's probable that story had emerged by the date of something like Lascaux or Chauvet. But unfortunately, these are things that just don't survive in the record. I mean, it's just gobsmacking to think that Chauvet Cave's artwork has survived for 33,000 years. Just think how unlikely that any of our most prized masterpieces will last that long.
Yes, good question. Does all art have its precursors in nature? And how much does the fact that animals play and animal behaviour tell us about storytelling and therefore fiction?
Well, I think it tells us a lot. In all animals, play enables them to train themselves at in the most urgent kinds of behaviours that they will face, situations of flight from a predator or fight against either a predator or another member of one's own species. So most play involves chasing or running, gambling, or play fighting of one kind or another. And of course, for human infants, it's much the same. But
just an enlargement of already learned or instinctive or genetic reaction behavior.
Well, because play is compulsive, because it has evolved to become compulsively pleasurable, because those that practice these things can actually execute, say, a maneuver to elude an enemy more successfully than others. It makes a difference to survival. And in the same way for humans, it's not just our physical our physical advantages or disadvantages that that we rely on, but our mental advantages. If we can train our minds in key modes, as I argue that we do in art, then we're at an advantage vis-a-vis others who are engaged in it less, and certainly against other species.
You describe all art as, quote, cognitive play with patterns.
Yes.
And I suppose it's the patterns that matter, and the patterns become more elaborate, and the make-up, the make-believe almost element of that becomes the dominant part, and thus we have fiction.
Well, yes. Pattern is a key idea if you're thinking about information. There is a superflux of information out there, but individual species are trained to absorb particular kinds of information in patterns that their minds process almost instantaneously, so that we see patterns of some particular cells in our retinas respond to edges and so on, and objects just spring out in our view. If we can understand information in terms of pattern, we can understand our world very, very rapidly. And so I see art as a kind of super stimulus of pattern, where we're bombarded with very, very high intensity doses of pattern. We get used to tracking that, in the case of story, into patterns of social information especially.
Yeah, but story and fiction itself is another leap beyond that, and I'm interested in tracing the gap between this emergence of pattern and the ability to make up events, create stories from nothing.
Well, we have a compulsion to, as very young children, to play with objects, with colours, with shapes, with designing things just by stacking them together, or by marking on surfaces. And in the same way, we have a compulsion for pretend play, and nobody has to teach a child to pretend play. They're just unstoppable.
Yeah.
And that goes on for say 7 or 8 years before I think their imaginations are extended enough through pretend play that they can do it offline, as it were, without physical expression.
Is there a genetic dimension here? Richard Dawkins, who I'm going to be talking to next week, came up with this theory of the meme.
Yes.
The genetic transfer of, or semi-genetic, or
it's not
genetic transfer of beliefs and understandings.
It's not really genetic. It's an analogy to the gene rather than a kind of gene. Yes.
Does that have any significance in this context?
Well, I'm not sure about my attitude towards memes. Sometimes I think, well, maybe they add something. Sometimes I think, well, no, they don't really. And I suppose that there are certainly many biologists and philosophers who think that it doesn't really add much, that it kind of, since cultural products really only catch on if minds respond to them, talking about the memes replicating themselves almost eliminates the focus on the mind, which bothers me. I rather like a different version advocated by Dan Sperber, who suggests an analogy with epidemiology, so that it's a kind of seeing cultural products as a kind of virus to which each of us has different degrees of resistance.
What was it that gave rise to the emergence of imagination? And does imagination call on the same capacities as memory, for instance?
Well, imagination usually it needs to be stocked by memory. Without the elements already in there in the mind, there's nothing to recombine in a fresh way. Well, that's a very hard one, and of course there's even less evidence of that, of the evolution of imagination than there is of art. It's hard to know how much imagination, say, animals other than humans have. For a long time, it was felt, at least by scientists, that animals were not really conscious, or they did not think. And I think nowadays it's increasingly accepted that there's a good deal of consciousness, there's a good deal of thought, there's a good deal of memory in many animals.
Does all that well up to produce a flow of imagination? No?
Probably not, no. And one of my stresses, in fact, is that we need the kind of compulsion to play in childhood, and it's very simple play with objects at hand at first. But the more children play at make believe, the more they can extend their imaginations without the physical props, and because we are compulsively social creatures, because we always want to know who's doing what to whom.